11b. The Gemara is in the middle of running a commentary on the story of the Jewish enslavement. We began with the slow progression into slavery and the gradual manner in which Pharaoh first convinced the people to join him on board in this project, and then eventually how he coaxed the people to slowly get stuck. We also talked about yesterday the great self-sacrifice of the Jewish women to give birth and raise children under such incredible circumstances. And as a result of that, they merited the whole redemption was in the merit of this, B, their children who they had self-sacrificed to raise and to give birth to, they were the ones to first recognize God at the sea. And now the Talmud continues the narrative. So we're in, yeah?
It just reminds me of a black hole that sucks up everything that comes close to it. The way the Egyptians sucked up 3 million people or 4 million or more right into that black hole.
Yeah. It's unfortunately not the first people in history to do it, not the last.
No.
Well, hopefully the last.
Hopefully the last. Well, no, it hasn't been the last. Hopefully there are no more going forward.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
But they haven't been the last. Okay, so now the Talmud gets to the narrative. We're in chapter 1, commenting on chapter 1, verse 15, 16, and 17, 18, 19, and so on in Exodus, chapter 1, those verses. Chapter 1 of Exodus, verse 15 through 19, or 20. There, the Torah relates, I'll actually read it for you, so that we get the full story. So verse 15 in chapter 1 reads as follows. After we described, verse 13 and 14 describes how they were slowly enslaved and their lives were embittered, causing them befarach, that word befarach that we spent a few days translating, that comes in verse 13 and 14. And then 15 reads as follows. Now the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. One was named Shifra, and the second name was Puah. And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew woman, and you see on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, she may live. That was verse 16. Verse 17, the midwives, however, feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them, but they enabled the boys to live. Verse 18, so the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, that you have enabled the boys to live? Verse 19, and the midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are skilled as midwives. When the midwife has not yet come to them, they have already given birth. Verse 20, God benefited the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And then finally, verse 21, now it took place when the midwives feared God, that he made houses for them. So they refused to go along with Pharaoh's idea of killing the boys, and therefore they are merited. What are they merited here? First of all, the Jews were successful in breeding, and B, they got houses. That's what the verse says here. Now it took place when the midwives feared God, and he made houses for them. So the Gemara is now going to go through each of these verses and comment on them. So let's begin.
It's like Miriam, who was given progeny. She married descendants.
Miriam.
Did she marry? We spoke earlier, a few weeks earlier, that she married descendants, righteous descendants. No,
You're talking about Yisrael. Yeah, Miriam also did. Okay, so we are on, so it's Yud Aleph Amud Beis, 11b. It's about, not actually halfway down by the bottom of the page. The line begins with the word Hikiru Tchila. And then there should be a small ches and then a small tes next to your Gemara, or a small 9 in my one. The line begins with the word Hikiruhu Tchila. And then towards the middle of the line, it says, Vayimar Melech Mitzrayim Yeldes Ha'Ivriyos. The next line under it begins with the word Ha'Ivriyos. You see it? So what's the next word after the tet?
Hema.
Sorry?
Hema.
Hema?
I'm pronouncing it right.
What's the letters?
Hey, mem, hey.
Hey, mem, hey. After a little tes.
A little bit in the middle of the page, too?
Sit higher than the middle of the page.
Okay.
I'm not sure where that would be. The one line starts with the word hikiru, and the next line starts with the ha'iviyos. See it? And then under that is isho bita. It's right in that region.
Okay, I'll catch them.
Okay. So the verse reads, "Vayomer melech Mitzrayim la'meyaldos ha'iviyos." And the king of Egypt says to the Jewish midwives, which one was named Shifra and one was named Pua. That's the verse which we read before, Exodus 1:15. So again, we have Rav and Shmuel discussing. And here I tried thinking about where there would be the issue of context versus literal meaning, and I can't find it, so maybe you guys can help. So let's see. The verse reads, so the Gemara continues, Rav and Shmuel were discussing this verse, which describes the Jewish midwives, naming them Shifra and Pua. So one of them, Chad Amar, one of the two, Rav and Shmuel, says, Isha Ubita. The midwives were mother and daughter. One opinion. Who would that be? Okay, we'll see in a second. The Chadam, another one says, it wasn't mother and daughter, but Kala v'chamosa, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. Right. Now let's conclude the statement. Manda Amar, the one who says Isha Ubita, that these midwives were mother and daughter, Shifra and Pua are mothers and daughter. This is Yocheved and Miriam. Yocheved being the mother of Moshe Rabbeinu, wife of Amram, and Miriam being daughter of Yocheved and Amram, sister to Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron. Now the opinion which said it's mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, that would be Yocheved ve'Elisheva. Yocheved being again wife of Amram, mother of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, and Elisheva would be the wife of Aaron. So this is the other opinion. Either Shifra and Pua is Miriam and her mother Yocheved, or it's Elisheva, wife of Aaron, and her mother-in-law Yocheved. Okay, so these are the two opinions. Rav and Shmuel. Now we've already established earlier that whenever Rav and Shmuel are discussing interpretation of the verse, they're arguing over context versus literal. First one being literal, Rav. Second one being context, Shmuel, which would mean daughter and mother are literal, daughter and mother-in-law. Context, I am not sure how. The floor is open. Which gets to a similar question we asked before. Why are we compelled at all to say that this is Yocheved and Miriam? The Torah gives names. Achas Shifra, one is Shifra, the other one's Pua. Maybe they're just two ladies called Shifra and Pua. Okay, so we have by tradition that they're in Moses' family. And then we have two different options as to how they're in Moses' family. Mother-daughter, or mother-in-law and daughter-in-law.
I have a question.
That's what I presume this discussion is about.
She have two names.
Who? Okay, so the Gemara is going to discuss in a second why they're called Shifra and Pua if they're actually not Shifra and Pua.
Sure.
We'll discuss that in a second. And that we had before, where the Torah, it's not so uncommon that the Torah will have more than one name for one person or one item, and one of the names is the actual name, and the other name is a description. So here we're going to see that Miriam and Yocheved and Elisheva are their actual names, where Shifra and Pua are descriptions. And we're going to see in a minute why they are. But we're just putting it out there where the context versus literal comes, if it's mother-daughter versus mother-in-law, I'm not sure.
Okay, so
Yeah, what are you going to say, Scott?
before we go further,
Yeah.
the argument between the two of them,
Right.
how does if let's say it's mother and daughter versus mother-in-law and daughter-in-law,
Yeah.
how does the lesson to us change?
Good question. Like, what's the practical difference?
What's the message?
Yeah.
What's our takeaway?
So on the simple level, the takeaway is lahagdil Torah v'lahadira, which means we're learning God's Torah. We want to expound and pummel its depth as much as we can, just for its own sake.
Right, but there's a lesson here.
Certainly, there is a lesson, and of course, the floor is
So
open.
how are the lessons different?
The floor is open. If you have any suggestions
No,
for
that's my question. How,
The floor is
like in this particular case,
the floor is open. I can think of Kabbalistic
Sorry, what
interpretation.
was the question?
What's the difference to us if it's mother and daughter, or mother-in-law and daughter-in-law?
Significant is who they are.
Right. So one is just for the informational part of it, but certainly everything in Torah has its lesson.
Right.
The question would be, what is the lesson?
So my
Good question.
question is,
Floor is open.
how are the lessons, how do they differ?
Floor-
That's
Floor is Floor is open.
Okay.
Actually, okay, so since you asked, I'll tell you what I was thinking of on a Kabbalistic level. And this gets back to what we talked about yesterday. Actually, forgot to remind me. We were talking about the apple tree
Right.
and why the women give birth under the apple tree. What's the significance of the apple tree? And I said that there's
Versus the field, right?
versus the field. So I mentioned that there is this idea of the apple orchard in Kabbalah. I didn't want to say anything until I looked it up. So I looked it up. I was confirmed what I had thought, which is the Chakal Tapuchin, which is the apple orchard described in Kabbalah, which we mentioned on Shabbos. This is the meal of the apple, the holy apple orchard. So the apple orchard is a reference to the feminine dimension of the divine spheres, the 10 spheres, specifically the sphere of Malchus. So just very, very briefly, Kabbalistic language for the spheres. So the 10 spheres can be divided into two categories. And using the metaphor of our personal experience as a model. You have the intellectual system and you have the emotional system. Okay. Now, in each of these systems, you have the male and the female. And the male and female come together to produce whatever it is you want. This is true physically as well. You have a male and a female, and you produce offspring. Okay. So what's the male versus the female? Just like in the physical sense. The male is the one who gives seed. The woman, female, receives the seed, produces it into a child. So the same thing is true on all levels. There's male, female, they unite to create the offspring. So in the intellectual system, you have the kernel of the idea. That's chachma, that's the male, the seed, it's a kernel of an idea. And that's in Kabbalah referred to as the father. Av is chachma, because it produces that seed, that kernel of an idea. It's received by bina, which is the capacity for understanding. Right? The capacity for understanding, I have the capacity to conceive ideas. That's one capacity I have, that's chachma. I have another capacity to understand ideas. So what happens in the interaction of my mind is first produce a seed, a kernel of an idea, and then my capacity to understand ideas takes that idea and develops it. Like a woman that receives a seed and develops it into a child. Yeah.
Das is the offspring.
Oh, and the offspring is das. Das being, what's the conclusion of this whole idea? Does this idea mean I should go for it or not go for it? Does the idea mean I should be strict? Should I be lenient? Should I love? Should I hate? Right? Okay. That's the offspring. That's das, correct. So you have male, female. That's referred to as the mother and the father in Kabbalah. Av ve'em. Okay. Now they produce both a son and a daughter. And the son and the daughter, okay, it sounds incestuous, but it's also just male and female interaction. They also interact, but they're not siblings with each other. They're just male and female. We're just calling them son and daughter because they happen to be produced by mother and father, which is the idea versus the chachma and bina. Following? Okay, so now in the second sphere, the second set, also male, female, son and daughter. This is, in Kabbalistic language, Zah and Malchus, which is like this. Zah, which stands for Ze'er Ampin, the minor face. Why it's called minor, we'll leave that alone for now. But it's called the minor face. And it's basically the emotional attributes. So these emotional attributes were produced by the union of the intellect, because only after the intellect produced an idea and then developed the idea, male, female, then it produces a feeling. Because I understand something, right? There's the concept of that person being good. There's me thinking about how amazing that person is, produces love for that person, right? So that's the offspring of the original mother. Father is the actual emotion. That's
Permission to ask a curveball.
Yeah.
Does it not come in the form of a question, or is it just a thought that gives you
The first idea.
the idea comes in and then to get the emotion? It's not like
It could be. It
it's
could.
not like why do I love them or how do I?
It could be triggered by a lot of things, right? It could be triggered by a lot of things.
So this comes from Das?
So das is the link between
The
Chachma and Bina and Zah.
Yeah, that's
So
the link.
das is while it's still in the intellect, and Zah when it's actually emotional. In other words, like this. You want to get very specific. There's a point at which I come to a conclusion in my mind. I ought to love that person.
That's the Das.
That's das, and then that produces actual love. If you want to break it down exactly. So in other words, das is the emotions while it's still within the intellect. It hasn't been born yet. If you want to, it's pregnancy, if you want to call it, put it that way.
But you also get a feeling like sometimes you see someone you should avoid them.
Yeah. So that's also an emotion. It's also an emotion. There's all kinds of emotions. There's love, there's attraction. Actually, all emotions in Kabbalah are broken down to one of two: attraction or repulsion. I want to get closer, I want to step back. And everything is a combination of the two. So respect is a positive, I want to step back. Repulsion is a negative, I want to step back. Right? But it's all some combination, variation of I want to get close versus I want to retreat, which is right side, left side. Whatever.
I have to look into the song that was written to see if there was a Jewish guy who did it. Who
What song?
don't sit under the apple tree with anyone
Oh.
else but me.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to see that. Okay, so
Very interesting.
yeah. Okay, so we're getting to the apple tree now. Okay, so now so we have the second set, the emotional. Now in the emotional, you also have a male and a female. What's the male and the female? Again, the male produces, the female receives,
Magnified.
and that produces the next level. So in this case, it's as follows. The male is the actual emotion, the actual feeling. The female
That's the Zah?
has Zo, Zayin Aleph, which stands for Ze'er Anpin, small face. Sorry?
Is the daughter part of that now?
Okay. Now the daughter part of it is, the female part of it is Malchus. Malchus. Malchus, which literally means sovereignty, is my capacity to project, or my capacity to speak, to share to the world outside of me. It's my capacity to share with the world, to the world outside of me, which is why it's sovereignty. Because what makes a king a king? What makes a king is that he has the capacity to control other people. So it's all about projecting to others. When I say the word, this guy is a king, it doesn't tell you if he's smart, stupid, kind, mean.
He's ruler.
Just a ruler.
Yeah, just
So
in control.
sorry?
Just in control.
That's right. So the essence of sovereignty is just the capacity to project over others. Right? So everybody has a certain sense of sovereignty. If you want to use a better word than sovereignty, you can use the word dignity. Rabbi Simon Jacobson uses that word, which is a good thing, because dignity is the way in which I project myself to others around me. So dignity is. So it comes out in speech, but it's also in the way I stand, the way I
Mannerism.
act, the way, and any way in which I project to the world outside of me is Malchus. Now, Malchus itself, my ability to interact with others, doesn't have any content. Doesn't have any content. It's just the capacity to take content that I have, emotions and ideas, and project it.
But there's a skill in interacting with
100%. So there's a skill to that, but it doesn't have any actual content. It's a recipient of content. It's like the female, which receives, but then it could turn into a whole baby. Receives the seed, but turns it into a baby. So in the case of Malchus, it receives the emotion and then projects it out to the world out me. And either I'm good at that, I'm not good at that. I'm good at collecting words and doing that. I'm not good at collecting words, whatever it is. But it's the recipient of the emotion and then projects it outward. This level, Malchus, that is the chakal tapuch in the apple orchard,
This is interesting too.
as opposed to the field, which is Zah.
So we're all recipients.
So we're all both male and female in that sense.
Right.
That's right. In that sense, we all have both. The question is which one's more dominant. That's right.
I feel this is tied into Sotah because
It very much is.
when a woman's wife misbehaves, you have to look back to the projector,
To the husband.
the husband, his acts.
Yeah.
And she receives only what
Right.
he gives her. And he gives her promiscuity and these sort of things because he's acting this way.
So then what she's
It's
producing is
reflected-
negative.
It's reflected of him on her.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a saying, like, if you don't take care of your garden, somebody's gonna come along and take care of it for you.
Okay. Yeah.
That's a saying.
Yes. Actually, the Gemara said it earlier. The Gemara said that a woman would rather the company of her husband than all the money her husband can give her. Right? That was a statement we had in the Gemara earlier. Remember that?
What was your statement?
We had a statement that a woman prefers the company of her husband than all the money he can give her. Remember we learned that?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, we had such, rings a bell. Anyway, so all to say that it would make sense, therefore, that the conception happens in the field, which is related to Zah, the male component gives, and the male gives. Whereas the Gemara describes the giving birth at the apple tree, because that's the female production, which in Kabbalah, the apple tree is the female production, Malchus.
Now, when we get back.
Because Malchus is the God's capacity to project, which is to create the next worlds in accordance with the emotions of the previous, right? That's the Malchus / Shechina / Knesset Yisrael / apple orchard. It's all the same level, different languages for it, which is basically after the divine system has produced its idea, then emotion as to we're going to be mean or strict, then it gets projected into our world to create a world of kindness or a world of strength or a combination thereof.
So what I'm seeing here.
That's the giving birth, which happens at the apple orchard, linked to that, create fruit, linked to that event where they're giving birth at the apple orchard.
That's the malchus.
Maybe that's what I was thinking.
This is what I'm.
Oh, and it's connected to what I'm about to tell you now about mother, daughter versus mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. I'll explain in a moment why. Yeah.
I want to hear that part, but this is what I'm seeing now. This is based also on the question I asked you a couple days ago.
Yeah.
When we're having the shot, when we're making the prayers for Shabbos.
Yeah.
When I asked you, if you recall, when I said like we're the bride.
Yeah.
So Hashem
Is the masculine.
is
the male.
masculine.
Yeah.
We're the feminine.
Yeah. So we're recipients
We're
from
the
Hashem,
recipients for Hashem.
and then we produce Torah
And then we
mitzvahs.
produce.
That's correct.
So Hashem is Chachma,
Yeah. Or yeah, Zah and Malchus, whatever.
and we're Bina.
So now you know the translation of the words. We
And
say
then-
before. That's right. But it's actually Zah and Malchus.
Okay,
So, sorry. So now you know the translation of the words when we say before Baruch Shamar, L'Shem Yichud Kudsha B'Richu Shechintei, in order for the unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah. That's what we say before Baruch Shamar. So what are we talking about? The unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah. The Holy One, blessed be He, that's Zah. That's the male component. The emotion, the actual midas, the actual emotional spheres. Shekhinah, that's Malchus, that which projects. And we want to unify the content of divine emotion into the projection of Shekhinah so that we can infuse our world with new life. We want to make that union. Follow? Follow that?
No, I think that's wrong.
Right. So again, Zah is the emotional sphere.
Yeah.
So in other words, all projection, in order for Malchus to project, it has to be recipient of some content. Right. So Zah, the emotion, has to give some content to Malchus so it can project outward. So if Shekhinah is Malchus and Kudsha B'Richu is Zah, then you want the unification of Kudsha B'Richu and Shechintei so that there's some infusion of life in our world. Because Malchus is what projects to create our world. But in order for it to project to create our world, it has to receive from Zah.
Right, because you said it has no content of its own.
That's right. It's just projection. So it has to get the content, the emotion. Let's say it's kindness, right? So my capacity to speak must receive from my kindness, and then I can talk kind words to you. Right? So if Hashem wants to communicate kindness to our world, it has to receive, then Malchus, the projective capacity, has to receive kindness from Zah, the emotional capacity. And that's the unification of Zah and of Kudsha B'Richu and Shechintei.
So there's a question.
Following? So we're asking Hashem to have this interaction so that He can produce life for our world.
so this pertains to the law.
One second, let me just ask one second.
So does the knowledge of the spheres coming together produce the kindness, or is the kindness separate and gets infused into the knowledge? This is some
Okay, so,
serious stuff.
yeah, kindness is a separate idea,
Okay.
which in theory, it's like this. In theory, a person who lacks the ability to project, and we know people like this, remain very kind in themselves and never share it with anybody. They have lots of love for the world.
They don't have the ability.
They're lacking the malchus. They don't have the ability to project.
Okay, but they have the kindness.
In theory, there are people who feel lots of emotions for others, but never share them. It's a big problem in a lot of relationships, right? Where I know you feel for me, but you can't communicate it to me. And they just have a very hard time doing it for whatever reason, right? That's a thing. So in other words, the feeling is not necessarily the same thing as the projection. And there has to be a unity between the two in order to actually communicate, I love you.
I know a lot of people just project, but nothing's going on.
So that's another problem. That's another problem, right? So there has to be a proper unification between the two. And that's what we say before Baruch Shamar, we're asking for the unification of Kudsha B'Richu and Shechintei. Kudsha B'Richu being Zah, the emotional, and Shechintei being Malchus, the projective. Clear?
So this pertains to the line, this is the meal of the holy shuffle.
Yes.
And the Zeran thing.
Yes, exactly. So Zera Anpin is Zah.
Right.
The holy orchard is Malchus. And over there we're saying that this meal is the meal of the unification, because Shabbos is the time when Malchus gets infused by Zah. Exactly right.
Beautiful.
Yes.
That takes it to another level.
Yeah. So now let's see what okay. So now let's see now I'll tell you what I was thinking about in terms of mother and daughter. This is mother-in-law and daughter. This is all conjecture. And again, you can reject everything I'm saying because this is all me talking. This is not any source talking. So
Well, that's not true, because Hashem is the source.
no, what I mean is,
Funneled through Torah and the bullshit.
what I mean is I haven't seen any source to actually translate this Gemara in this fashion. I'm just
No,
sharing.
I'm saying, you're saying it's you talking, but it's funneled It's fun.
I appreciate that, yeah.
I know we're not the
It's not coming out of, it's like, okay, yes, it's not coming out of nowhere. But I'm saying I haven't read any source which translates the Gemara in this fashion. But let me just tell you what I was thinking of mother and daughter versus mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. So again, we're talking about giving birth. This whole discussion is giving birth, midwives. So we're talking about the projection. We're talking about after the union's done, the projection. But there are different unifications that can happen within Kabbalah. And let me explain how. So let's take, let's do with mother and daughter. It's an easier one first. So daughter is malchus, is my capacity to speak. So ordinarily, I'm speaking after some sort of emotional attachment. Let me explain what I mean. Even if I'm sharing an idea, but I'm only sharing the idea with somebody else if I actually have some sort of reason to care for you. I'm not stopping strangers in the streets and telling them ideas. I'm telling it to you. Because even though I'm sharing an idea, which is intellectual, it comes from Bina, but nonetheless, it filters through the fact that I care enough about you to share the ideas with you. So there is an emotional element to all projective speech. Right? So Malchus, in essence, when a projection speaks, it's always filtered through Zoh, through the emotional sphere. Right? Which is why there's always a bias. There's always bias. There has to be, because I'm a human being and I'm biased to my feelings, So when I share an idea with somebody, if I like someone, I'll share the same idea very differently than someone I don't like. Why? I'm compelled, let's say, to explain something to someone I don't like. Supposed to. I fail, right? So some guy I don't like, right? Yeah, right. But think about this. Think about this. You think you're sharing an abstract intellectual concept, and yet the manner in which you express it to someone you care about is different than the manner in which you express it to someone you don't care about, even though it's the same intellectual concept. Because you're biased. Because before you speak, it always filters through how you feel about the person to whom you're speaking. So it's always an emotional thing. Always, right? Which is why even if you're sharing Bina, it's going through Zoh.
Even if you have to pretend to be non-caring, it's still going through.
It's still going through all that, right? It's always like that. But a truly elevated person can remove all of that and communicate direct Bina. It's a very lofty level. That is mother-daughter relationship. Because instead of going mother, Bina, to Zoh, son, and then to Malchus, it's a much higher level of communication, which is Bina directly to Malchus, mother-daughter.
They feel each other.
No, it's basically communication that is unbiased.
That's rejected from Bina.
Bina, because Bina is just abstract knowledge, information, right?
It's void of emotion.
Void of bias.
So that would be
Not in the negative sense, like it's lacking all emotions, dry, but it's void of bias. It's the pure truth.
So that would be the level that the Rabbi was at.
That's mother-daughter. This is also, so that's mother-daughter. Okay. Now, what would mother-daughter-in-law be then? That would be the idea going through the emotion and then project it out. Because that's right, because Zoh gets in the middle. Daughter-in-law means its relationship is through Zoh. The end is Malchus the same. The end is a female. But the question is, what's the female's relationship to the original female? Is it through a husband or is it a direct line, mother-daughter? So if it's mother-daughter, then it's female direct to female, female intellectual sphere, understanding, Bina, direct to communication, Malchus, without the bias of the male in the middle, the Zoh, it's mother-daughter. Mother-daughter-in-law would be also intellectual idea spoken in Malchus, the daughter, but it's filtered through the son-in-law. It's filtered through Zoh, filtered through the son, the Zoh. That's what I'm thinking. I think it's cool, but I could be completely off base. But I think it's pretty cool.
Remind me to tell you a joke about that later.
Yeah?
It's a
Okay.
funny joke, by the way.
Yeah, okay.
Because he doesn't plug up to that.
Exactly.
All right. Okay, we're going to stop over here, even though we're mid-sentence, because the Gemara is about to tell us. So far what we had was a dispute. If it's mother-daughter, Miriam and Yocheved, or is it mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, Yocheved and Elisheva, which is Aaron's wife.
Moses' sister.
But the verse refers to Miriam's sister-in-law, Moses' sister-in-law, yes.
Yeah.
But the verse refers to them as Shifra and Pua. And like you asked, why are they being called Shifra and Pua? That's the next line of the Gemara, which we'll get to, God willing, on Monday. Why they refer to as Shifra and Pua if it's not actually Shifra and Pua? How is that descriptive of their jobs and who they were? So we're going to learn about that, and we're going to learn about the self-sacrifice they've taken upon themselves to, yeah, that's right. The self-sacrifice they've taken upon themselves to actually go through with birthing these children. So yesterday we talked about the self-sacrifice of the mothers to conceive and give birth. And Monday, the self-sacrifice of these two women to actually be the midwives when Pharaoh instructed them, defying the Pharaoh's decrees. And we're going to see how deep that goes. So God willing, on Monday, wonderful Shabbos, everybody. So even if we didn't learn so much Gemara, we learned a little Kabbalah.
We learned a lot.
Okay,
It doesn't matter, but we learned a lot.
thank you. Okay, wonderful day, everybody.
Also,
Oh, sorry, yeah?
Also, another interpretation is that when they asked Miriam, how come there's so many sons being born
Mhm.
and we don't see them? Or you don't kill them? And they say that Miriam answered, these people are so used to giving birth that before we get there, they're always.
Right, so that's what the verse said. The verse said that they are like chayas, they are like midwives. And if they don't require the help of others, they're already born before we get there. The Gemara is going to get into the details of what exactly that means. We're going to get into that, God willing, on Monday. So all those details are going to come up, God willing. Okay, have a wonderful day and a good Ner Shabbos.
About